contribution today. Thank you very much, Tosh. And I again hope you have a wonderful night. It's late in Japan. And now it's time to move from Japan. Thank you once again, Ambassador. Move to India, to our friends in India who are already connected and they are waiting for us. So, well, in India, we have the special honor to, we have the honor to join the conversation today with Justice Rohinton Nariman. The moderator is my friend Rohita Prasad, LLM Class 99, partner at J. Sagar Associates, a full-service national law firm in India, where his practice focuses on mergers and acquisitions and equity capital markets. Prior to joining JSA, Rohit worked in the Singapore offices of White & Case. He's a very active member of the Alumni, the HLSA Alumni Association and community, not only in India, but really around the world. Justice Fali Nariman and Rohit are connecting, as I said, from India, where it's currently, I think, around 7 p.m. So that's the beauty and the power of this wonderful international forum. Dear Rohit, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Salvo. Thanks a lot. I am in the august company of Justice Rohinton Nariman, LLM 1981. After graduating from HLS in 1981, Justice Nariman practiced maritime law in New York with the law firm of Haight, Gardner, Tour and Havens for a year. He then returned to India, to Bombay, where he started his litigation career in the High Court. And a few years thereafter, he moved to the Supreme Court of India, where his rise was meteoric, being designated as a senior advocate at the age of 37. Indeed, the then Chief Justice of India amended the rules which prescribed the minimum age of 45 in order to so designate him, especially. An expert in comparative constitutional law, Justice Nariman, as a lawyer, has had more than 500 reported Supreme Court judgments to his credit, and in a short span of 6 years as a judge, has penned no less than 300 judgments and orders. From 2011 until 2014, he was the Solicitor General of India. In July 2014, he was appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court, becoming only the fifth in a line of practicing lawyers who have been so elevated to the Supreme Court without actually being a judge of any High Court in India. A man of multifarious interests, Justice Nariman combines an abiding passion for Western classical music with a deep knowledge of it. He's an avid reader of and speaker on issues related to history, philosophy, literature, science, and above all, comparative religion. And talking of religion, one very little known fact of him, at least little known outside of India, is that he is an ordained Parsi priest in a line of a few celebrated Parsi jurists, priests of India, which goes back to Sir Dinshaw Mullah and Sir Jamshedji Kanga, starting at the early decades of the 20th century. Justice Nariman, a very warm welcome to our forum.
Thank you.
So, Justice Nariman, what we would really like to start off from is your motivation for going to HLS to begin with. So, Indian law graduates really started going abroad for a master's degree in fair numbers only after the economic liberalization of 1991, which led to an increase in foreign investments in India and cross-border transactions relating to India, and which in turn spurred the growth of the corporate law firm culture in India and led to a creation of a market for foreign educated and trained lawyers in India. Whereas you went in 1980, a time when not many young law graduates even contemplated, let alone actually enroll in a master's degree, save for those who actually wanted to do academics. So you have been a sort of a pathbreaker in that sense. What was it that motivated you so far back in 1980 to actually go to the US, choosing it over the UK, which was sort of the preferred destination at that time for young Indian lawyers, and to HLS in particular?
Perhaps the fact that I graduated from the campus law center in New Delhi. The campus law center in those days had a number of professors who were in fact trained by Harvard professors. I'm told that Professor Arthur Taylor von Mehren had come down from Harvard and conducted training courses with a number of our professors. And the result was that they were trained to teach in the Socratic method, so that we had the case method study. I remember at that time being very impressed by a movie that I saw, which was Paper Chase. And if I remember right, there was a Professor Kingsfield who taught contract. And the main character was a student called Hart. Now, he begins with the seminal case of Carlyle versus the Carbolic Smokeball Company, which is an 1893 judgment of the Court of Appeal. That case has a contemporary link to it for this reason, that there was an influenza that was raging in London, just as COVID-19 is raging just now all over the world. And as a result, the Carbolic Smokeball Company sent out an advertisement which said that any person who purchases these smoke balls and utilizes them every day for a week or 2 weeks, and thereafter contracts influenza, will be paid £100. Now, Mrs. Carlyle did exactly that. She followed the advertisement to a T, and unfortunately contracted influenza, which was deadlier than COVID-19 at the time. There were many more deaths in London than there are deaths, relatively speaking, in London today, thanks to COVID-19. And the result of this was that Mrs. Carlyle, when she sued, was asked several questions. First, where's the question of there being a binding contract? Now, the court held that the advertisement itself would amount to an offer. You can have an offer to indeterminate people. It was accepted by Mrs. Carlyle's conduct. Therefore, it wasn't necessary that there had to be some express assent given in writing. And the very fact that she had inhaled these smoke balls over 2 weeks was acceptance. Consideration was the difficult part, so they said no, she suffered a detriment as a result of purchasing the smoke ball. And therefore all the elements of contract were proven. Now, what was interesting was that Paper Chase gave one an insight into how persons taught at Harvard and what exactly the student expected from the professor. We were also taught contract, and we had very interesting judgments given to us of the Indian Supreme Court. One, for example, was Bhagwan Das Kedia, which was a 1966 judgment, which involved the question as to whether a contract was accepted under our ancient statute of 1872 by following the literal language of section 4 of that statute, or updating the statute with technology that had come in. And the majority judgment held, yes, you can update it so that if you have a telex or you have a telephone conversation, it's like two persons being across each other. And unless the person actually hears the acceptance, there's no contract. Unlike a case where somebody in the old days had to post something. The post office, therefore, being the agent, the moment the letter got posted, acceptance was complete. So the interesting facet of this was that we were constantly taught judgments which had two views. And we therefore debated this in class. And as a result, we found that the Socratic method was the kind of method that we wanted to study. Also, I must tell you, we had a Professor Erabi who taught us constitutional law. He was excellent. And he enthused us because he told us how our founding fathers borrowed from many constitutions, including the oldest, which is the US Constitution, from which particularly from their Bill of Rights, we somehow have also taken a large number of what we call fundamental rights. So this really was the reason for my wanting to go to Harvard, to actually maximize what I had learned in the law faculty here and maximize it by concentrating fundamentally on US constitutional law. That US constitutional law background is proved very useful.
Right. Okay. And once you were in Harvard, you spent a year. How would you describe that year? Its highlights, some memories that you cherish and would like to share with us, both academic and personal. After all, the USP of HLS experience is not only your ability to choose from the wide range of courses that it has on offer, but the fact that you study in an international setting with classmates from 50 different countries, uh, which is so very enriching.
Yes, it was one of the finest years of my life. I recall when we first went there, we reached in the month of August. And August in Boston, I discovered, was something like August in New Delhi, without the benefit of an air conditioner. So it was extremely hot, humid. I remember that I was in 108 Ames, because they had these hostels which were named after their great deans and professors. And in 2 weeks, I shifted to 116 Shore, which I discovered 20 years later has now become a girls' hostel. But what was interesting was that you had to live in a hostel, which I had done for the first time in my life. And as you rightly pointed out, you came across persons from about 40 different countries. And you made very good friends with persons who were as diverse as Austrian, Brazilian, Australian, etc. So that in itself was a very great experience. The other fabulous experience was, as you rightly pointed out, I'm very, very deeply interested in classical music. Walking down Mass Ave and going to Symphony Hall to hear the Boston Symphony, which I did repeatedly under Ozawa at that time. And I can also recount that we used to visit Symphony Hall, which had a number of guest artists coming to it as well. And one particular concert stanza, which was the Mahler Fifth Symphony, it begins with a trumpet chord, which goes pa-pa-pa-pam, pa-pa-pa-pam. And Abado, at that time, was conducting Claudio was conducting the London Symphony Orchestra. And I recall that the trumpet player played the very first note wrong. He started pa-pa-pam, and it went on. Abado didn't stop it. I read about this concert performance some 10 years after, and I actually attended it. And I was amazed to discover that the trumpet player of the London Symphony had auditioned to become a trumpet player in the Boston Symphony on that morning and was turned down. Which is why that very first note was played wrong. So it is memories like this that come back to us, which are fascinating. Now to come to the academic side. As I told you, I took courses which involved constitutional law. Now, my very first semester involved a course which was Constitution and Minority Issues with a professor called Derek Bell, who was very interesting. And an even more interesting course which was Constitution and the Press, which incidentally was not taught by a lawyer but was taught by a journalist, by Anthony Lewis of the New York Times. Both courses were fascinating. One learned the ins and outs of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the great judgments of Dred Scott, Plessy and Ferguson, Brown and Board of Education, Cooper and Aaron, etc., etc. And in the press class, equally, we had a huge insight into how brilliantly the American law had developed in terms of Congress shall have no law. Now, of course, you had the hardliners like Justice Black and Justice Douglas who believed no law meant no law. But then that didn't exactly work. So that you had so many decisions which then, like the famous celebrated Holmes' decisions, Abrams, etc. And the great concurrence, so-called concurrence of Justice Brandeis in Whitney and California, that lovely line, if you remember. Fear breeds repression, repression breeds hate, hate menaces stable government. So Anthony Lewis was a professor who somehow enthused us almost as much, if not more, than regular professors. So that first semester was fascinating and one learned a lot. The winter semester was taken by Professor Unger. Now, Unger was a man who paced up and down, did not believe in the Socratic method, didn't even look at us. He walked into class, said what he had to say, and walked out. And he was a very interesting chap because he was 33 years at that time. He was only 33 years old. And he used to refer to himself as me moderns. And in jurisprudence, he had just penned his third book, which could have brained anybody. It was a huge thing of some 1,000 volumes, which was left for us to read in the library. Interestingly enough, Professor Unger, being 33 at that time, was only 63, 30 years later, and was able to teach my daughter, who is also a Harvard graduate. So the winter semester was a fascinating experience with Professor Unger. What was even more fascinating was the fact that I wanted to complete my paper, which was of 2 credits, with Professor Archibald Cox. Now, as you all know, he was a very famous man. He was the Solicitor General in the Kennedy era, and he was a professor of law at the time. He had been fired by Nixon, if you remember, at the Watergate time. And he was deaf in 1 year. So I decided to take on something which was very difficult, which was a comparative analysis of how the United States Supreme Court dealt with its race problem and how our Supreme Court dealt with our caste problem, in particular, the black in the United States and the scheduled caste here, through the judgment, the prism of judgments. And every time I found something every time I found something which was very exciting, and I take it to Professor Cox, he wouldn't even look at it because he was not interested in the American side. I was only interested in the American side. He kept wanting to learn what India had done. So there was a cross current between the two of us. And finally, I managed to write a paper in that winter recess of some 10 days, where I had to work very, very hard. And I was almost all alone because everybody else had gone for their winter vacation. Now, one interesting thing a few of us did in that vacation, because we were alone and because we were penniless, and my dad, that I started cooking at Harvard, which saved me a lot of money, which went into classical record. I brought back some 500 records. But because we were penniless, we decided to, like Mrs. Cargill, accept some advertisement which sent us to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And there was this born-again Christian group who decided that deep winter would be the best time to convert persons because none of those persons could travel outside the church. So imprisoned as we were in the church in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a preacher came out and said, "You all know why you are here." So we said, "Yes, sir. I mean, we want to hear what you have to say about Jesus' teaching." We said, "No, we are not just teaching you about Jesus. We want you to understand that you have an immortal soul. That immortal soul will never reach heaven unless you believe that Jesus died in order to save us." At this point, I decided to get a little mischievous, so I put my hand up and I asked the preacher, "Please tell us, because we are from countries which are in the Far East, South America, etc. We're not familiar with Christianity, but was Moses also a great prophet?" They can go to hell. Then came the fatal question: how could he have gone to heaven? He was much before Jesus. If he didn't believe that Jesus died in order to save us, I was instantly segregated. I was immediately put away. I was told, "Do whatever you have to do for the rest of the day, go back without mixing with anybody else."
And you went.
No, but 1 second. And that again was an experience on its own. Then comes the final term. And the final term I took up constitutional law taught by Richard Parker, which was a general constitutional law course, which again was fascinating. And a very interesting course on ancient Hindu law taken by Professor Maxfield.
Yes.
And there were only 6 of us.
Rohinton.
Yes. And there were only 6 of us in that class. It was a fascinating class where we go into the ancient Hindu texts. And I recall that I had written a paper from those Hindu texts on the difference between penance and punishment. Highly esoteric. Unfortunately, I can't lay my hands on that paper today. I would love to see what I had written at the time, but this was my general experience I know.
And when you came back to India, plunged headlong into litigation, how would you say that your education, especially your learnings of the U.S. constitutional law, helped you both as a lawyer and as a judge? In particular, are there any cases where you felt that you were able to make a persuasive line of argument based on principles of U.S. constitutional law? And again, as a judge, having penned 300 judgments, to what extent and how have you applied the U.S. jurisprudence in furthering the interpretation of our own constitution here?
Yeah, I think I applied it quite often. In fact, as a lawyer, it came to my rescue in at least 3 or 4 judgments that I can recall, 3 or 4 cases that I can recall. One is the famous Madras Race Club case, in which one of the questions that arose, apart from the acquisition of the race club by the state, was as to whether horse racing could be called a wagering or gambling activity. And for that, I relied very strongly on American judgments and was able to persuade the court that in point of fact, it's a game of skill and not a game of chance. Also, in many others, for example, I recall one judgment in which prospective overruling, which is that a judgment normally declares what the law has always been, but sometimes you want it to say that it will operate only from the date of the judgment, something which was done by one Chief Justice in a judgment which got overruled by 13 judges. But nonetheless, in order to argue that in another context, I had relied upon a number of Supreme Court judgments of the United States. The first being the Sunburst Oil Company case, which was a beautiful judgment, I remember, of Justice Cardozo. And another interesting case was a trademark case, where again I relied on American law, where Peter Scott, which is an Indian so-called Scotch whiskey, was sought to be interdicted from using the word Scot by the Scotch Whisky Distillers Association. And I think worldwide we were perhaps the only persons who won that case for Peter Scott, for the Indian distiller. And there again I found American law helped a great deal. In my judgments as a judge, yes, in constitutional law I wrote a very detailed judgment on the First Amendment, on freedom of speech, in a judgment called Shreya Singhal. And very large parts of that judgment relied upon my First Amendment class at Harvard. And the insight that I had got into the 200 years of American experience on the First Amendment. Apart from that, the privacy judgment in 2017 also relied strongly on a number of judgments, including the famous Griswold versus Connecticut. Of course, we didn't have to go to any penumbras of our fundamental rights. We grounded and founded it in human dignity and in liberty, which is our Article 21 article. And I also used it in Navtej Johor's case, which is a judgment of 5 learned judges of our court. In fact, that case dealt with the criminalization of homosexual activity among consenting adult homosexuals. And we pretty much followed the trajectory that the US Supreme Court followed. Bowers and Hardwick, I remember, at first upheld this, and then Lawrence and Texas again by a 6-3 majority upset Bowers and Hardwick, and we did likewise. We had a 3-judge bench which first, like Bowers, upheld it, and then we struck it down. So yes,
it has really made
it has helped. It has also helped largely in the Admiralty sphere. But then that again was not a Harvard experience, but that was a New York experience.
And now the issue that has been occupying our minds for the last 9 months, COVID, the justice delivery system in India, like the other spheres of human activity, has not remained untouched by the pandemic. So during the initial lockdown, the courts were shut. Even now, the courts are taking up only urgent matters. Uh, and effective hearings on a regular basis are yet to restart. And lawyers, especially the younger, less well established ones, have suffered disproportionately. And also those who are practicing in the lower courts in India. Our global audience will be very much interested in hearing from you as to how the courts in India have risen to the challenge of dealing with this pandemic and in ensuring the continued access to justice of the common man.
I think they have done reasonably well under the circumstances. See, the initial lockdown period was a period where there was a deep freeze and nothing happened for about 5 or 6 weeks. But after that, I think courts in India have picked up. And hearings are conducted, at least in the Supreme Court, over the TV screen. The only snag is that since the Supreme Court uh, has persons appearing from all over the country, a lot depend on lawyers' own internet system. And because those systems are sometimes not up to it, there are snags. But despite the snags, we've got a lot of work done. We are working, though not at full pace, but we are working considerably. And the Supreme Court has done a good job. The High Courts are doing a very good job. The district courts are also trying to do a good job. And under the circumstances, I think we're doing well. It's important to tell you also that in our system, oral argument is very, very important. A lot depends upon the lawyer's skill in court. And most lawyers tell me that dealing with a judge across a video screen is not the same thing as a physical hearing, because he cannot exactly fathom what the judge is thinking. Neither does he know what exactly the judge wants. So there is this disconnect. And lawyers, I think, are dying to get back to the stage of physical hearing.
Indeed. Yeah. Because one essential element of courtcraft is picking up the non-verbal signals, both of your opposing counsel and of the judges. So even though technologically it might have helped lawyers in managing their time much more efficiently, you still feel that in a post-pandemic world, it will still be better to go back to the system of oral arguments.
Given the fact that we believe more in oral persuasion than written arguments, perhaps yes.
One final question is, our personal lives have also not been left untouched by COVID. One would say mostly negatively, with forced separation from near and dear ones and curtailment of our social lives. However, a lot of us have found in the post slowdown of our fast-paced lifestyles a time to, to our old hobbies, listen to music, reading books, finished unfinished business. How has COVID affected you personally? So what have you spent your time, other than your judicial work, in the last 7-8 months or so?
So I was very hard at work. In fact, harder at work than I've ever been. Because I've been able to use this time in order to write 2 books. One on the dissenting judgments of our court, which should come out next year. And the other on Zoroastrianism, which is my faith, and its impact on other world religions. So I've got a lot done in this period. I was also able to see my ailing mother every day for a period of 3 months, which I wouldn't have been able. And she died, unfortunately, in June. So COVID hasn't been that bad an experience after all. And Japanese forebear just told all of you. It all depends on how you look at things. I am also an optimist. No, there's no point crying over spilled milk. Try and do the best under the circumstances.
Very well. So we have one question. A listener has said that in Indian Supreme Court, there are multiple benches of 2-3 judges which keep on changing. Is it unnerving to sit with different judges all the time? And how do you resolve differences with such varied judges and with such different approaches? This question has been asked by Shadan Farasat, LLM 2009.
No, it is not at all unnerving. You get used to it. See, what happens is there is a certain camaraderie among judges. And by and large, one is able to find some via media by which the two or the three decide the actual judgment. It is rare that you have dissents, but you do have dissents. And since the training, the background of most judges is pretty much the same under the same system, ultimately it's not such a strain. You get used to the fact that you have to sit with different people at different times. And it's amazing that there are certain skills which you thought you'd never have and which somehow emerge as a result of this.
Thank you very much indeed, Justice Nariman. Salvo, you
Yes.
have any?
Well, thank you very much, Justice Nariman and Roy, for such an interesting conversation, and especially Justice for sharing your inspiring and motivating HLS memories. Very, very touching. Now it's time from move from India to